Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, welcome to another edition of America in Focus. I'm your host, Saeed Sabur. I'm also being joined by my co-host, Ron, the webmaster of freeworldfilmworks.com. I repeat, that's freeworldfilmworks.com. If all of you have been paying attention to the news lately, the Republican Party has been giving us a dose of their theatrics. Well, the Democrats do the same thing. Because in reality, Democrats, Republicans, conservative, liberals, left-wing, right-wing, these are all semantic terms that really don't mean anything in the real world. And in reality, there is only one political party controlled by the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers. And it was the Rothschilds who brought Barack Obama to prominence in politics. He is not this hard-working, astute young student from the south side of Chicago. In reality, he's actually in the south side. He was known more for his sexual antics that involved a lot of homosexuality and drug use more than anything else. And he was used by the Rothschilds, brought into political prominence in an effort to extend their New World Order, which they have done because Barack Obama has failed to bring any troops back from Afghanistan. I repeat, a country that has not done a single thing to the United States. It was not responsible for 9/11. The criminal elite that control the United States, along with Israel's security agencies, they were responsible for 9/11. Well, if you think that's the end of it, no, it's not the end of it, because this theatrics, it continues and continues, and your average sheep will continue to buy all the lies of this propaganda apparatus. And I just learned that Herman Cain has decided to enter the race, and apparently he won the Florida straw poll. Is that correct, Ron?
No, he's been in the race from the beginning. As what I went over with a couple of shows back was he was running in, fifth place in all the polls. Actually, he was below Michelle Bachmann, not the escapee from the Minnesota lunatic asylum. He was way down there, getting less than 5 percentage points, etc.
Right, that's what I meant. I mean, his prominence was not just not at the level, right?
At the Florida debate, he actually did fairly good, but he did not do nearly as well as Ron Paul, or even the new guy who was in it. I forget his name now. But what happened was Ron Paul won the Fox News online poll after the debate. Fox News hosted it, the debate, had a poll where you could only vote one from one ISPN. And Ron Paul got, I think it was 39% of the votes. Romney came in second. I think he had 22 or 23. I forget the exact figures. And Perry was down at about 12%. And Kane was about 10%. Well, Michelle Bachmann, the escapee from the Minnesota lunatic asylum, was at 1.5%. So her big Iowa win, the Iowa straw poll, which she paid $180,000 to get enough votes to beat Ron Paul by a couple hundred, was a rigged deal. She would have gotten probably a couple of dozen people to vote for her if she didn't pay people to vote, because in the Iowa straw poll you have to pay $30 to be able to vote. And she handed out $180,000 for 6,000 votes, and she only got about 4,500. So about 1,500 people just took the $30 and walked. She's an idiot and a fool and a jackass, and there's nothing you can say about her complimentary. She's an absolute total fool. Now, Herman Cain was down there in the bottom tier. There's let's see, 4 or 5 tiers in the GOP run for the White House. The top tier is Ron Paul. The second tier is Mitt Romney and Rick Perry. The third tier is Kane, Santorum, well, no, not even Huntsman. I would say Santorum and Kane, and then the fourth tier is the escapee from the lunatic asylum in Minnesota, Huntsman, and the other ones I forget who they are. So, what the Rottenfeller crime family decided to do immediately after the Florida online Fox poll, when Ron Paul creamed everyone, was they would rig the Florida straw poll and give it to Kane. And they took Ron Paul's percentage, which was about 37. We don't know for sure because they probably shaved a few points off. Anywhere from 37 to 40% of the votes. They gave it to Kane, who had about 10%. And they took Kane's 10% and gave it to Ron Paul. And then they manipulated the numbers on some others to give Rick Perry second place at 15%. Romney took a third place of 14%. And they had, they put Santorum up. He should have been about 3%. They had him up at 10%, just barely edging out Ron Paul. Well, the whole thing's rigged. It's just like in 2008 when Hillary, the demon who possessed Adolf Hitler, now possesses Hillary Clinton. She was running against Barry Soetoro, the illegal alien. In California, the poll the day before the primary in California, the day before, had Obama up, Barry Soetoro up 10 percentage points. When it was all over, Hitler won by 13 percentage points. That's a shift of 23 percentage points in 24 hours.
Yeah, it was rigged. There's no way.
Physically impossible. It's impossible. You cannot do that. And I don't care how many commercials you run the night before the election. You cannot shift 23 percentage points. Tucker Carlson had his own show, cable show. He mentioned it and thought it was extremely unusual, and the next week he was fired. He was fired. He lost his job for just mentioning. He didn't accuse Hitler of rigging the. He didn't accuse anyone. He just says this is extremely unusual.
Right, and keep in mind all those listening. Right, and keep in mind all those are listening about Tucker Carlson is a neo-Nazi. He's not a true patriot or anything, and he even mentioned the total unusual scenario with this poll shift. And I wanted to mention some other. I wanted to mention some articles. We talked about
before you go on to other articles. Let me just mention Kane, and then we're going to get back to him later on in the program. We're going to go into his background. But the reason they propped Kane up with this phony straw poll is to try and knock down Ron Paul, because Ron Paul is killing everyone in the polls. He's won over half the polls outright, come in second in almost all the other ones, and only a couple has he gone lower than second place. In all the polls combined, you add them all up, all the votes, Ron Paul's the clear leader. So why doesn't the GOP, Fox terrorist propagandists, criminals, traitors, ever mention who's winning, who's in the lead on all of the GOP polls so far? Have you heard any of them ever mention all of the polls? Who's in the lead on all of the polls? No, you never will, for the simple reason Ron Paul has a clear victory in the field over all the others, and they're not going to mention that because it'll wake the sheeple up who are dead asleep in their little beds, and they're never going to wake up unless someone smacks them right in the face with a 4x4 like you do a jackass when it won't move. You hit it as hard as you can on the skull with a 4x4 and try and wake it up. Go ahead now.
No, exactly. No, Ron, this is a very good point. I want to extend on this more than anything right now. All those who are listening to America in Focus, and those of you who had listened to me and Ron when we were on Power of Truth Radio, wake up, do yourself a favor. The minute you listen to this broadcast, go to Free World Filmworks, get those documentaries and films by our good friend and patriot Anthony J. Hilder. Then invite your next door neighbor. Yes, I mean that literally. Invite, make a stand, do something, take a chance. Invite your next door neighbor to come view those films with you and also awaken to what's going on, because this is a serious issue. This is not make-believe. This is a reality. And constantly we are living in a society that's constantly bombarded with consumerism and misinformation, disinformation agents and media telling us that, the world is perfect, the economy is great. No, the economy is not great. In fact, very soon the economy is going to be in a total crash. And the world is not a safe place. There's a lot of still warfare going on in Libya and elsewhere. And that's a point that I wanted to bring up about Libya, because there was an interesting article I was looking at about a certain individual who went to Libya. Now, we know Cynthia McKinney went to Libya, and she talked about all the heinous actions that NATO had committed against Libya, things that will never be reported on Jewish Zionist media. Well, interesting enough, I found another article, Reverend Walter Fauntroy. He talks about NATO atrocities. Walter Fauntroy is a former U.S. representative for D.C., and he has mentioned he was actually thought to be dead. Well, he's come out and he has spoken of gross atrocities being committed in Libya. I'm talking about murder, rape, things that we don't hear about in the mainstream media. It's like with Japan. They mentioned the earthquake, the tsunami. Well, actually, it was a HAARP-inspired incident in Japan, but then we stopped hearing about it. Just like also Ron pointed out on a previous show about Palestinian suicide bombers. We heard about that for a while, and then they just suddenly went away. Likewise, this is the way the media is. They filter certain information. They put forward certain information only when it's convenient for them. And why don't we hear so much about Libya and atrocities? Because they don't want you to hear about what's going on in Libya. They don't want you to hear what NATO is doing in Libya, just like what the United Nations troops did in Somalia to the Somali people. They never put that information on the mainstream Zionist media apparatuses. And another related article with that, now we talk about Ron Paul, and the reason why they are trying to suppress Ron Paul as much as possible, as me and Ron have pointed out several times on America in Focus, is because he is against war. He has mentioned that repeatedly, his hatred for what happened after 9/11, how the Bush administration went to war illegally, against Afghanistan, against Iraq. And this is why they want to suppress Ron Paul as much as possible. In a related piece, let's see. Okay, here it is. It's on let's get this article. And okay, here it is. Israel positions nuclear subs off Iran by Keith Johnson. And if you don't think that war is going to continue, if you think, the world is a beautiful place and it's going to remain that way, think again. They want another war. They want another war against Iran, and they don't care how many people die in that war. And reading this article about Israeli subs near Iran's coast is frightening, because this is what they want. They want a one-world regime, a one-world government, and this is what they've done to the world by launching all these illegal wars. But in addition to that, they've destroyed all our economies in the process, and it's pre-planned because they want to bring about a one-world order.